All right, Ben. Everybody remembers the hysterical Joe Rogan exchange with Dave Rubin, where Dave Rubin was like, I guess I'm just interested in the post office not existing on a conceptual level, and Joe being like, dude, what the fuck? Again, it was actually a great moment. It was extremely funny. It's provided a lot of levity for us. Part of the reason we just can't do as much Rubin stuff is because Rubin is just, have you been reading the reviews that have been, including in The Spectator, which is conservative on his book? It's just, the guy is a joke and a jackass. And he's actually comparing bad Amazon reviews to book burnings. Come on. But Joe Rogan doing this to a congressperson, and not only a congressperson, the guy on the right that they think is their guy. They think that this guy is the pop culture answer, and to politics on the left for young people. And so this exchange with Joe Rogan and Dan Crenshaw on universal healthcare is something. And I think, and it does show us, the barrier to have national health insurance is because all the power in the world is in capital's hands. But ideologically, the terrain is really changing. So let's give this a watch. And then Ben, give us your riff on it.
It tries to move past these essential foundations, whether of a free society that we have to adhere to, and because the other thing I push back on a little bit is the healthcare as a right statement, and I push back against that because when you're calling something a right, what you're effectively saying is that somebody else has a obligation to serve you. And it's hard to call something a right when that right requires the service of somebody else.
Don't we already do that? Don't we already do that with the firemen? Don't we do that with the police department? Don't we do that with public schools?
Not exactly. No, we have public services that I would distinguish those public services from something like a direct point of care, and I would distinguish them to an enormous extent. And here's why: you can add a few 100,000 more people to the nation's population, and it doesn't change the mission of the military, right? It doesn't take anything away from them. But because of this sort of non-rival, this is like an economics term, but this sort of non-rival attribute of these things, it is different, right? Because there's only a select number of doctors, and we've already said that once you put price controls in, there's going to be less doctors because doctors will be paid less, they'll get burned out more. Then hospitals will be able to. I actually never finished that point. The reason price controls reduce supply, and the reason we see supply reductions in other countries, is because hospitals don't get the same amount of money. They're not going to invest in that extra ICU bed. They're not going to buy those extra ventilators. They're not going to hire those other doctors. A doctor doesn't want to be a doctor because they don't make the amount of money that they thought they would make. They're doing extra work because there's more people who now have access to them, but there's less of them. So wait lines are huge, and they're seeing multiple more patients a day. Doctor burnout increases quite a bit. That's the quick answer as to why that happens. But does that kind of answer your question?
Not very convincing.
That does. Yeah, the human right issue. We kind of moved around with that. The idea that it's different than the fire department or the police department, or
it's not a right either. Actually, the fire department's not necessarily a right as we would.
But it's a public service that's provided to everyone.
Yeah. It is, but understand. So let's call it a public service then, and let's call healthcare a public service as well. If we were to do Medicare for all,
but wouldn't the result be the same if it's provided for everyone?
Not from a practical standpoint, just because it's much easier.
Awesome.
That's incredible, man. That's really amazing.
It is, and all right. So he does. So he repeats this thing about doctor shortages that just literally Google doctor to patient ratios by country. Not true, right? Canada has exactly the same doctor to patient ratio we do. as I never get tired of pointing out in these things, the highest doctor-patient ratio literally on the planet is in Cuba, which I'm fairly sure does not have a private healthcare system. But really the amazing thing about this is just Dan Crenshaw doing this really slow, uncertain Gish Gallop, just sort of moving from talking point to talking point to talking point. And Joe Rogan is not the kind of person who would normally do this, being like, yeah, okay, but you never actually answer my question. Let's go back to that.
I want to just say this is also stylistically, this is really important because there's something there about why so many people like Joe Rogan. Now, this isn't what I do, right? Like, and I'm not saying, so I'm not like under an illusion that this is what I do, and I'm also not under this. I don't think everybody's obligated to do it, but he's extremely patient. He's not laughing at the guy for, totally stumbling around, having no idea what, like ricocheting between cliches and then trying to buy some heft by using a term from economics or whatever, even as he's making absolutely no sense, like a kid floundering through a book report looking for something that sounds sophisticated. Rogan doesn't do any of that. It's a respectful, nice conversation. A lot of people find that very appealing. And what they also do find appealing, again, is just that one thing that, to his credit here, he just doesn't let go on. It's just like, I don't think he answered the human rights question. Then we'll get into semantics. Okay, well, it's a public service. Okay, cool. Then it's a public service. Same upshot, right? That's called the speed to width ratio, or whatever the hell else he's going to go. I mean, the moral look, everybody needs to have healthcare. That is something that on very basic grounds, it gets complicated. There's propaganda. If Bernie Sanders was a president pushing for universal single payer healthcare, I think there might even be $1 trillion cumulatively spent on everything from AstroTurf campaigns to public propaganda. Every single consultant, strategist, brand person you can imagine from both political parties would be hired by the insurance. The insurance industry would get a bailout from Nancy Pelosi on the amount of money that it would spend. And other industries would spend too on the political premise that you would never want to give Americans something that was that good for their well-being. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard. I don't want to undervalue that, but there is a power in how basic that is, and it does resonate with a vast majority of normal human beings.
Absolutely.
That of course it's a public good, and of course every single person should have it in abundance.
Can I just jump in real quick, just because like Crenshaw really pisses me off for the way that he represents the state of Texas, which is experiencing right now a massive health crisis. Texas is actually one of the most underserved states in the country when it comes to the ratio of doctors per citizens. And in rural Texas, right, where a lot of these people who vote for Republicans or whatever live, it's even worse. I mean, like the ratio for the average ratio for doctors in the country is, I don't know, Ben, you might have the numbers better than me, but something like 75 primary care doctors per 100,000 people. In Texas, it's like low 50s. So to sit here and act like some kind of free market system, right, which you would imagine that Texas would have one of the most free market systems in the country, somehow provides more doctors to more people, is absolutely wrong. Especially because you don't even have to be like understand economics, have a deep understanding of economics to understand why. If you have a small amount of people living in a very large amount of land, right, you can't make a lot of money off of that population, right? So that it's going to be very difficult to provide rural health care to folks. right? So that's why you can't have a free market system is so bad at providing healthcare to rural communities, right? That's why you need some kind of funding that is not just charging people per services, but is actually just universal, funded by the government, funded by the collective, right? Because you just can't run a free market operation healthcare system and not letting people die for want of basic medical procedures. So screw off the Crenshaw, man.
Absolutely. And in the second clip, it's basically the same point still, but what I like about it is that Rogan in the second clip is still, probably like more laid back than like I am ever, but like relative to Rogan, you can tell that he's getting a little bit annoyed.
Fire department an example of socialism that works?
Well, it's definitely not an example of socialism. I think it's an example of a public good, the way the military is an example of a public good, the way the highways are examples of public goods, the way parks are examples of public goods. Right, but
they're funded by the people. It's funded by people overall, and it doesn't cost people money to use them, and the people have these as a basic part of our society and our civilization.
No, I understand that, and I have no problem with that. I just would not call them socialists.
Well, what would you call the fire department? How does it get funded?
It's a public good.
How does it get funded?
It's a public good. It's funded by the public,
right? And
it's not relying on it's not relying on the tenets of socialism to function. And so now we're.
This is college shit. This is dorm room shit. And there's some people, by the way, on the other side of this who get and I have seen, I'll name names. I saw the Anand Giridharadas Democracy Now! Clip about how like the other cars are capitalism and the highway is socialism. Like, look, I get how these comparisons can run amok pretty quickly, but no, the fire department is a socialistic program. It is. Is it full socialism or whatever? No. What does that even mean? Who knows? And if you want to say we could say it's a public good of a social democratic policy. I believe in ancient Rome, actually, there have been situations where there have been multiple competing firemen, essentially.
Yeah.
And that did not work out well from a putting out fires perspective.
Yeah, actually. So Crassus, who in the late Roman Republic, there was this power struggle and alliance at one point between him and Caesar and Pompey, but was one of the was I think the richest person in the Roman Republic, and one of the things that he did to make money is that he essentially had his what amounted to a private fire department, right? A bunch of slaves with buckets of water, and there was a fire at somebody with a nice house. They would go over there, and he would offer to buy it from them before they put it out, right? So obviously those are good negotiating conditions to get a good deal on the house. By the way, off topic, but I saw when Griscom was talking last time, I saw the shelf behind him. And respect for that big row of Hitchens books up on the top right there. I think I recognized Catch-22, Prepared for the Worst, and arguably.
There's also No One Left to Lie to.
That's a great book. That's Hitchens' treatment of the Clintons. Yeah, and I don't want to take anything away from Rogan because I've heard him say tons of times that specifically with healthcare, I mean, he supports universal healthcare. He said that for years. Mm-hmm. But the bullishness of that argument and the range of which this is seeped into our body politic. Thank you, Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.